Good afternoon, and thank you for joining this NESIS webinar, Providing Quality Feedback and the Summative Evaluation. My name is Kimberly Simmons, and I am the NESIS coordinator, and I'm joined today by Cami Nairn, and she is the NESIS Education Product Consultant. Hi, Cami.
Hi, Kim. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today.
And Robert Sachs sometimes joins us, but we like to include Robert because he is also the NESIS business owner. And Robert is a great resource and has a lot of knowledge and can answer a lot of questions. And sometimes we refer to him, and sometimes we may refer you to him for some of your questions or facilitate a question that you have to Robert. So we'd like to include Robert here as a resource. Our webinar norms for today, we ask that you minimize your outside distractions, be attentive and participate, notify the presenter if you are having technical difficulties, use the chat on your dashboard to ask questions or notify the presenter if you are having difficulties, mute your microphone, and video is not needed. There will be a follow-up email. It's scheduled for 24 to 48 hours after the end of the webinar. Within this follow-up email, you will receive a certificate of completion. Just complete the NESIS feedback survey to receive your certificate. You'll also receive a link to a recording of the webinar, links to resources discussed during the webinar, and answers to any questions remaining from the webinar or asked afterwards. So our webinar outcomes for today: how to complete the summative evaluation, and of course, the goal is always growth. And we want to look at ways to ensure accurate and reliable feedback as it relates to the summative evaluation. So we know that feedback is important to teachers and it is important to the growth of teachers. And understanding the process for rating teachers builds our confidence in providing that feedback. So in the title of the presentation for today, it's noted, and it was purposeful, that it was about quality feedback. And so today, when we think about building our skills to provide quality feedback, that's going to first include building our skills in understanding how we are rating teachers and what that really looks like, and looking at the element ratings and how the element ratings feed into the standard ratings, so we can explain that process to teachers, we can be transparent about that process, and then we can actually use the language of the elements, the language of the standards to build and promote growth for teachers using their professional teaching standards. So here we begin with the teacher evaluation process from page 21 in the manual, and it's also a handout for today's webinar. And our focus for today will be step 4, the summary evaluation and goal setting. And this information is in the chart is reflected, all of this information that you see in this chart is reflected of the North Carolina State Board policy. So just as a brief review, the year-long process is a series of formative assessments where data is collected on each of the observation rubrics. And then at the end of the year, all of the data is considered, including how many times throughout the year each item on the rubric was noted. And this informs the end of the year summative evaluation. So let's look closely at component 7, the summary evaluation conference and scoring the teacher summary rating form. So prior to the end of the school, the principal conducts a summary evaluation conference with the teacher to discuss the components of the evaluation cycle type used, comprehensive or standard. And at the conclusion, we do these things. We give a rating for each element in the rubric. For evaluating North Carolina teachers, we comment on the ones not demonstrated, and we give an overall rating of each standard observed. We provide teachers the opportunity to add comments to the summary rating form. We review the completed teacher summary rating form with the teacher, and we secure the teacher's signature on the record of the teacher evaluation activities and teacher summary rating form. All this information is provided here for you. Where I want to focus in is the element ratings and the standard ratings, and I've highlighted those in red here and green, and then I've had some blocks over here. Just wanting to pull out that at the end of the school year for the summary evaluation conference, that there's two types of ratings that we're looking at. The element ratings, those are the observation marks on the rubric that determine the element ratings, and these marks are generated automatically in the observation scoring summary that's generated inside the NESIS tool. And then we have the overall rating of each standard that's observed. And those are the element ratings and additional data that's used by the principal to determine the final standard ratings. So I'm just going to let you look at this for just a second. Okay, moving on. So when compiling observation data to determine the summary ratings, the number of checks per descriptor should be added together for scoring the elements of each standard. The principal or assistant principal must determine whether or not each descriptor was observed at least once across all observations over the course of the year. And here we have a sample observation scoring summary of Standard 1 Element A, teachers lead in their classroom. So let's look at the descriptors under the developing category. Understands how they contribute to the students graduating from high school. This descriptor was marked 3 times throughout the year. Uses data to understand the skills and abilities of students, was marked 2 times during the school year. Moving across to the proficient category. So you see, takes responsibility for the progress of students to ensure that they graduate from high school. That wasn't marked at all. And provides evidence of data-driven instruction throughout all classroom activities. That was marked twice. You see where I'm going. Each of the descriptors, you can see how many times they were marked or were not marked. Okay. And so here is an example of a summary scoring sheet. Notice the red boxes on the scoring sheet are for the element ratings. The element ratings are then used to inform the standard ratings. So here when we determine the element ratings, those element ratings inform the overall standard ratings. So let's begin by talking about the element ratings and how we determine the element ratings. Do I have any questions, Cammie? Does everybody seem to be following along and doing well? This may be a review for some. This may be a lot of information coming at some. If anybody has any questions or comments, this would be a good time before I get started into the element ratings, just to get any feedback.
I'm not seeing any questions right now. And guys, you can find your chat on your dashboard bar. Mine is at the bottom of my screen, but you can enter any questions. Make sure that the to, if you want everybody to see your question, is to everyone. If you want it to be private to me and Kim, you can send it to the host and presenter. And then I think Kim might see it. I don't know if I'll see it, but if you try to send your chats to everyone, that will work.
Okay, I do have a question here. How do the scores on the peer observation weigh in with the scores from the supervisor? All of the checks have equal weight. If it was marked, whether it was marked by the peer or marked by the principal or the assistant principal, because sometimes that AP may observe the same person as a principal. It's not always just assigned to one person to conduct all the observations. Sometimes they switch off. Anyway, it has the same weight, right, Cammie?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so yeah, usually the next few slides, generate some discussion. I just want everyone to feel comfortable to ask any questions, and it may not. Hopefully, it will be just clear.
Yeah, and we have a
Yeah.
small group today, Kim.
Okay.
So we could possibly unmute you if you're more comfortable with that.
Okay.
Yeah, just let us know in the chat.
Okay. Okay. So like I said, we're going to start with the element ratings and see how they're generated. So when determining the element rating for each element, we want to identify the first descriptor that has not been marked throughout the year. Here we see it has been the element circled in red. I'm sorry. Here we see it has been the descriptor circled in red. The rating for an element is the lowest rubric column category for which all descriptors were observed at least once during the evaluation cycle. The rating for element 1 would be developing. So see, this one was not checked, and so we would come back here. All of these were, and so it would be developing. So on the bottom of the screen here, you see standard 1 of the summary rating sheet for teachers. You would mark developing for 1A, leads in the classroom. The same process is applied throughout each element. For element 1B, teachers demonstrate leadership in the school. The rating would be proficient. So now I'm going to let you guys determine what the ratings would be on 1C, D, and E. You can just jot it down. Hopefully it's pretty easy for you to figure out. So if you said proficient, you were correct. So after rating for each element is established, an overall rating for each standard is determined. For each standard 1 through 5, the evaluator makes a reasonable assessment based on evidence, including the element rating derived from the observations and any or other relevant information that can help inform the rating of the overall standard. So the element's rating is determined by the observation data. The checks that are collected are objective. We just reviewed how to determine the element ratings. The standard ratings involve more data and are more subjective. So you see, determining the summary evaluation involves other additional data that you want to use. The element ratings were determined by the checks. It was easy to determine. I looked, I saw how all of the elements that had been observed during the year. I saw where they had not been observed. I went back to the rating where they had been observed. I marked that. But then when I get down to the standard rating, I take all of that information into consideration. But then when I look down here at this bulleted note that is in bold, it says for each standard 1 through 5, the evaluator makes a reasonable assessment based upon evidence, considering the element rating derived from the observations and any other relevant information that can help inform the rating of the overall standard, any other relevant information. So it means that I consider what I have there from the element ratings, but the principal may have other relevant information that they want to consider that informs that rating. It really is about what all that the principal knows about this teacher, and it helps inform. Now, You do put a lot of weight into those element ratings because all of that data was collected throughout the year, but it really also is about other additional data that the principal can consider as well. So let's talk more about that because we'll look at it. So I want you to look at this chart for just a minute, kind of take in all the data that you see. So let's review. During the summer evaluation conference, the principal and the teacher discusses the self-assessment, the most recent professional development plan, and the components of the North Carolina teacher evaluation process that was completed during the year. The observations, artifacts submitted or collected during the evaluation process, and other evidence of the teacher's performance on the rubric. The final summary rating form is to be jointly reviewed by the teacher and evaluator during the summary evaluation conference. So when you look at this summary rating sheet, do you have any questions, or does anything jump out at you that you might think would deserve more conversation? Do any of the ratings do you think any of the ratings took additional data other than the element ratings into consideration? And if you do, how about putting that in the chat bar? What standards do you think took additional data other than the element ratings into consideration?
So I have a standard 4 from Tiffany. It's in the
Okay.
Q&A. I can't see anything anybody answering anything in the chat.
Okay. So let's take a look at standard 4. So someone might think that if you're looking at the standards that you might take an average you might give them or assign them the rating where they had the most checks, and so that would not justify this rating because there would be 3 checks in developing and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 checks in proficient. So you'd think, well, why did they choose developing over proficient? They must have taken additional data into consideration, or maybe the principal put more weight on the ones that were marked in the developing category. Those would all be things to consider from the principal's perspective. Yes. Yes. Anyone else? I see another 4. What about so there's a or even standard 2. If you were doing an average, you might come up and do an accomplished here. And not even choose if you were doing an average. Again, you would look at how you weighted how that principal valued or weighted what was marked distinguished and what was marked proficient. But those would be conversations that you would want to have when discussing how you determined the overall rating for the standard. So Does anyone have any questions? Further questions? Here is a screenshot of the scoring summary from the NESA's online tool. The observation scoring summary summarizes the ratings marked throughout the school year and generates that information for you. Cammie, would you like to say anything about this? Is this still an accurate screenshot?
Yes, it is. So you would navigate into the plan, into the record of activities, activity in the plan. You have to scroll on down in there, and when you open it up, there's the observation scoring summary, and you click on that, and it tallies up how many times each descriptor was marked, and so they can use that. You can print it out, or you can just view it to then use when you are going into that summary evaluation and having to mark those descriptors and then the overall standard rating. Do you have any questions about how to get to that area? We have worked really hard to make sure all the observations are included at the top of the page. If you see the little mark on the little ABC on the left, you can actually turn off a tally. So if you didn't want to include, do you mind muting just a second?
Oh, sorry. Yes, certainly.
Yeah, so if you want to not include, say, an additional observation, or somebody did an optional peer observation, and the principal doesn't want to include that in his decision, peers do have to be included in the comprehensive plan, but on the other plan types, it is optional. So we made sure you could see it in the abbreviated plans and all of that. You can actually uncheck the peer observation at the top of the page and then only see the tally marks for the required observations. Any questions about that? Okay, I'm not seeing any.
No, I don't see any either.
Okay.
Thanks, Cammie.
You're welcome.
So just as a reference, I included where you can find all of the information for completing the end of the year final summary evaluation, the directions and what I just covered. It's located in the teacher evaluation manual on page 36. So now moving into the summary evaluation conference, which really is the heart of our conversation today. So imagine that a principal shares a completed summary rating form, summarizes the rationale behind each rating, and asks the teacher if he has any questions. Technically, the principal has fulfilled his duty and complied with the state regulations. But did the principal provide feedback that would result in better teacher growth and increased learning for students? And I think that we all know that the answer to the question is no. But too often, this is the scenario that we see across North Carolina, whether it be because administrators are rushed at the end of the school year or they simply do not have the expertise to coach teachers in their content area. However, it is important that we change this process to ensure a supportive growth model for teachers. Teachers want and deserve feedback. And what do we know regarding effective feedback? We know that feedback is not about the person giving it. Even though it's so easy a lot of the time to share our own stories and to provide lessons that we've learned that we don't want the people that we're caring about or the people that we're coaching to have to experience, we have to remember that feedback is about listening. And feedback is more effective the sooner that it is given. Also, feedback is about the future. And feedback is about behavior, not morale or attitude. And feedback is also a sign of strong leadership. The Summary Evaluation Conference is also the only time that ratings should be discussed. Threats to teachers in feedback conversations include conversations that are based on a thin slice, which means teachers have a fear of the conversation at the end of the year being based on just those 45 to 60-minute spans of time that the principal or the peer visited their classrooms. They're afraid that just the information that was collected during those brief times that you experienced in their classrooms is the only time that you're really going to base an opinion on their work. They're also fearful of unclear expectations, that you were with them, you saw them, but you still never provided them with what your expectation really was, that you didn't understand their content or never communicated with them enough to create a goal for them to work towards, a clear goal for them to work towards. Also, a sense of disempowerment, not having control over their growth, and an absence of helpful information. Leaving a meeting knowing that they needed to improve, but not knowing how. So how can we remove these threats from summative evaluation conversations? We meet teachers where they are, acknowledging that the goal is growth. We also promote a transparent process for these conversations. What does that look like? Having expectations about what those conversations will look like. Who will bring what to the conversation? Who will lead the conversation? The teacher knowing that they will have an equal opportunity to provide input into the conversation. The use of the PDP. This removes uncertainty. Knowing that you will always come back to the goals of the professional development plan removes uncertainty about the topics of the conversation. Also, having clear feedback connections to the standards and elements, using the language of the observation and the evaluation rubric, and having ideas and resources for the teacher moving forward. Summative evaluation feedback. Administrators must enable teachers to be primarily responsible for judging the success of their own work. By listening, you hear what teachers need most. Remove stress from the evaluation process, especially the summative evaluation conversation, by reminding teachers that the purpose of the process is teacher growth, not dismissal. So I'm going to give you just a minute to take a look at element 1A and the two descriptors that are circled, noting this is what we looked at earlier when we were judging on the element ratings and the standard ratings. And these were the two descriptors that were not marked. Just want you to read those two descriptors. So, feedback should focus on growth for the teacher. Let's use the example observation scoring summary to identify where we want our conversation to focus. Two descriptors not marked at all during any of the observations. Under proficient, we have a descriptor, and under accomplished, we have a descriptor. Communicates to students the vision of being prepared for life in the 21st century. So your conversation between these two descriptors should focus on your conversation should focus on these descriptors, and you should use the language of the rubric within the conversation. To the right, you see the questions for the post-observation and summative conversations for Standard 1. Let's look at element A at the top. Do any of these questions relate to either of the descriptors circled? The second bullet, how are you preparing students for the 21st century, relates the descriptor under accomplished. Bullet 3, How do you know your students are progressing relates to the descriptor under proficient. This descriptor is often very difficult for teachers, especially in the primary grades. However, it is important that we are always working towards progressing forward, setting goals for students, planting seeds of career and professional dreams at all ages. Teachers should be encouraged to embed such ideals at all grade levels. So you have a resource here, and here I'll take you to the next slide. This is a reflective questions resource, and it's attached as one of the handouts for today, and it can be found on the Nexus Google site as well, but it provides these questions that use the language of the descriptors that you find in the rubric to help you with those feedback conversations using the language of the rubric to ask those questions that promotes teacher-led conversations where you can provide feedback that doesn't have to be so content embedded, but it's growth that's within the rubric and the professional teaching standards. Another area for conversation could be around here, creates a classroom culture that empowers students to collaborate. It is unrealistic to think that you would discuss every descriptor from every element that has not been marked. Pick and choose from the focus for your feedback. In other words, there's no way that throughout the summative evaluation for you to go through and have a feedback conversation on every descriptor that wasn't marked, but pick and choose where you feel like you need to have, that's what you would do in preparation for the summative evaluation conversation. Pick and choose where you feel like you need to have those feedback conversations. And remember that the questions are just a resource for you to use. You can modify them to meet your need, or just provide them to your teachers as a reflective document. A lot of times, if they just arrive prepared to answer some of those questions, that's already provided a lot of growth to them, just having prepared for those questions. And then finally, we have component 8, which is the PD plans, and this is the second part of step 4, the goal setting. And you see to the right, we have a completed summary rating sheet for teachers. We must determine which of the PD plans the teacher will complete for the next school year. And we have individual growth plans. That means that the teacher was proficient or better on all of the standards 1 through 5. The monitored growth plans, the teacher had at least one developing, and for a directed growth plan, the teacher may have been rated not demonstrated or developing for 2 sequential years. So since this teacher over here, the summary rating form, has a rating of developing for standard 4, then this teacher would be on a monitored growth plan for the next school year. So on a monitored growth plan, that means that the administrator and teacher would meet together and collaboratively develop goals for the next school year, and they would meet 3 times during the school year, and we recommend that they meet more often, quarterly or every 6 weeks, to keep closer tabs on the progress of the PDP goals. And that's it for today's presentation. Do we have any questions?
I am not seeing any questions, Kim.
Okay. Just as a reminder, this is a link to the Nexus Google site where you can find all of the resources needed for your work using the Nexus. And contact information if you have any questions. I know it gets busy this time of year. Please don't waste your time looking for a resource. If we can help you, there's my email on the screen, and I know Cammie feels the same way.
Definitely, yes.
Also, here is would you like to review this, Cammie, and maybe define who
Yes,
needs to
if you
call this
yeah,
number?
you should have somebody in your district. Most of your NISA's coordinators have access to open tickets with DPI. But if not them, somebody in your school or county does have the access to open a ticket. You just need to find out who that is in your district. And if you have issues with the system, please have them open a ticket. And they have this link to cover that. We need to know who, what, when, and where. And we ask that you include either the name of the person in the location or the UID of the person in the location. But we ask that you not send both, because it's still like a semi-email system and we don't want those two together. So either UID or name and then the issue. So yep, you can ask your local NISA's lead.
Okay, thank you, Cammie. Just a reminder, again, you should receive a follow-up email within a couple of days. And we ask that you please complete the NISA's feedback survey. We do have a couple of upcoming webinars, end of the year for teachers and support staff. That will be Tuesday, March 9th, a week from today, from 4 until 5. And here's the registration information, the event password. And end of year for principals will be on March 16th from 4 until 5. And we hope you'll join us, or if you know of teachers or support staff or principals that you think might benefit or may not know about this webinar, please pass the information along. Cammie, anything?
Yeah, I just have one final note. I've been getting a fair amount of questions. I guess districts are trying to determine how their staff are rated at this point. They're looking for reports to run the ratings at this point of the year. And there really is no report for ratings at this point of the year because you're doing observations. And the people will not be rated until you do that summary evaluation. So that we really don't have a report for that. The best reports are those individual reports for the observation scoring summary, or there is an ad hoc report that the district administrator can run. It really just, you need somebody that's really good at reading reports, because that report will just print out all the descriptors that were checked, all the text of each descriptor that was checked in each element rating. So you're going to need somebody that would really loves to dig into data for that. And maybe they could create an export that kind of tells you which elements in how many in each category. But the best one I would recommend is that observation scoring summary to get the totals. And again, that's just an individual report by staff. So that's the only question I've been seeing recently. Did you guys that are joining us today, did you have any questions about the summary evaluation that you would still like to have answered that you didn't get an answer to today? I do see a question out here. Let's see. Is the content on March 16th inclusive of what this webinar included as well? It will go over that. The one on March 16th is going to be more system-based. I'll be presenting the walkthrough of the steps, and then Kim will be also including some additional information about that. It probably will not go as in depth onto each little step, because we'll be covering teacher evaluation process, principal process, as well as what the superintendents need to do when they're evaluating the principals during that time. So it will cover that, but it's a different viewpoint. You're welcome.
Okay, thank you for the questions. Again, here's our contact information, and thank you guys for joining us today. I hope you have a great evening. Thank you, Cammie.
Thank you, Kim. I enjoyed it. Y'all have a good night.